The day comes when a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization sends to Earth a subatomic artificial intelligence, which covers the planet like a dome to slow down the scientific progress of humanity.
You've got more to phone what you have more idea what we can do.
The year is 1966. In China, a young physicist named Wen Jie witnesses the murder of her father, accused of counter-revolution in belief in God. She herself is arrested. London, 2024. A strategic intelligence inspector responds to a call. A renowned physicist has voluntarily ended his life, leaving a note on the wall of his apartment. It was a countdown. Meanwhile, at Oxford University, a particle accelerator test is underway. The project leader, Vera, tries to send her colleague Saul home as the development is being shut down. Lately, voices of renowned scientists claiming that physics is not a science have been increasingly heard, which depresses the young scientist. Unexpectedly, Vera asks him about his belief in God, and upon receiving a negative answer, she goes to the huge reactor and throws herself down. Later, two friends, Augie and Jin, who are also scientists, discuss the strange events happening around the world. Saul recently sent a bizarre video recording of a phenomenon that is simply inexplicable from a physics standpoint. Watching the recording, Augie suddenly notices a strange flickering before her eyes. At the same time, the inspector is also puzzled by the strange deaths and notices 5 talented young scientists whom the deceased Vera once sought worldwide and involved in her research. A memorial service for the deceased woman begins in the church. Vera's friends and students express their condolences to her mother when Augie arrives. The girl still doesn't understand what is happening to her and what the flickering numbers before her eyes mean, and she suffers from it. The inspector also follows the ceremony and manages to film an elderly gentleman whom none of the attendees know. After the funeral, Augie goes out to smoke. She sits on the steps in a quiet alley, but her lighter is broken. Suddenly, a girl appears next to her, offering her own lighter and starting a conversation about life and God. Augie even takes her for a recruiter to a sect, but then the girl suddenly offers to stop the countdown ticking before Augie. All she needs to do is shut down her nanofiber research project, and tomorrow at exactly 12 o'clock in the night sky, she will see the universe winking. Then the recruiter leaves. We are shown again the year 1967. After her arrest, Wen Jie is sent to a secret radar base, where she will have to serve for the rest of her life. In the present time, the inspector manages to find out that the owner of an oil corporation, a very wealthy man named Evans, was present at Vera's funeral. But tracking his helicopter was unsuccessful. Another oddity emerged. One of the deceased scientists had a very strange, shiny helmet, which intelligence failed to obtain. Meanwhile, Vera's mother gives the same helmet to Jin, who came to visit the woman, and then it turns out that Vera's mother is the same Wen Jie who was arrested in the 20th century in China. Later, Jin puts on the helmet and is transported to virtual reality. She finds herself in the middle of a desert, over which the hot sun quickly rises. Trying to hide from it, the girl steps on something that turns out to be the dried remains of a person. She gets scared, takes off the helmet, and returns to reality. And Augie and Saul go outside this night, and at exactly midnight, the sky suddenly begins to flicker, as if the universe was indeed winking at people. Saul realizes that Augie sees the numbers of the countdown to her death. In the morning, Augie arrives at the institute, and just before the start of the quantum experiment, she orders to turn off the equipment, and immediately the flashing numbers before her eyes disappear. The action again shifts to 1967. Wen Jie learns that her colleagues are actually searching for ways to send signals to the inhabitants of extraterrestrial worlds. She calculates the trajectory and suggests sending it directly to the sun. Reflected from the sun, the signal is greatly amplified and reaches the far corners of space, but being forbidden, the girl does it at her own risk. In the present time, the inspector shows Augie a video recording of her conversation with the stranger, who is not present in the video. It can be seen how a cigarette is lit, how Augie talks to someone, but there is no interlocutor, and there are no signs of editing. The inspector tells Augie about the flickering numbers, which were seen by other physicists around the world. Jin puts on the virtual reality helmet again and finds herself on the first level of a strange game. A man and a girl approach her, asking her to solve the puzzle of this world and lead her to a distant pyramid where a king is waiting for them. It is the era of chaos now, and the king needs to know exactly when the era of order will come. Besides Jin, the king has other scientists, but the one who guesses correctly wins. And if she is wrong, an entire civilization will perish. But then above the pyramid, the scorching sun rises. The man pulls her into shelter, while the girl remains under the rays of the sun and instantly dries up, turning into a bundle of flesh. The man gives it to Jin, explaining that in this form, the body can live until the era of order. The woman returns to reality and decides to ask for advice from a scientist and her friend, Rooney. He puts on the helmet and also finds himself in another reality, but the guard of the game beheads him, explaining that he was not invited. Frightened, Rooney takes off the helmet. He is sure that such technologies simply do not exist on Earth. While the pair discusses the game, the inspector listens to their conversations. Rooney, returning home, finds a package with a helmet and an invitation to the game. He finds himself in Old England and behaves quite rudely with the sir who meets him. Later, he excitedly tells his friend Will about it, and Will confesses that he is dying of cancer. Jin returns to the game and stands before the king, where her rival tries to guess the date of the beginning of order. She opposes guessing, as it is anti-scientific, but the predictor insists on his own and names a date. Then the predictor fast-forwards time to the era of order to test his mystical theory, and the day comes when the time of order arrives, and it is possible to bring the dried bodies back to life. Jin sees how the guards throw similar bundles, like the one she has from the girl, into the water. Once in the water, they quickly absorb moisture and turn into living people. Her girl also comes to life. Everyone rejoices in the newly found life, but suddenly the sun begins to recede, and a snowstorm hits the people. They try to save themselves, but freeze and shatter into pieces. Shocked, Jin remains alone in the middle of the icy desert. The appearing game guard explains that this civilization perished from the cold. Jin couldn't save them, but she established the superiority of science over mysticism, so she can move on to the second level. The inspector reports to his boss Wade that in the 20th century, observatories around the world caught a strange signal, and one of them was the Chinese observatory. And in those years, the future millionaire Evans lived right there. It was then that Evans and Wen Jie met and realized that their views were very similar. On the same day, Wen Jie received a signal from space in which a representative of a highly developed extraterrestrial civilization introduced himself as a pacifist and urgently asked not to send signals into space because other civilizations would come and conquer their world. Reading this appeal, Wen Jie, embittered by the unjust death of her father, sent a signal into space inviting them to come to Earth and put things in order, because people cannot do it themselves. The action again shifts to the present time. Augie finds an alien virtual reality helmet in Rooney's house. She immediately tries on the strange toy and ends up in England, where she immediately dies at the hands of the game guard, as she was not invited. She rushes to her friends and learns that two of them are already participating in the game. Augie is sure that this thing hacks the brain and asks her friends not to play anymore. But the pair, despite the promise, enters a simultaneous game. On the second level, they find themselves in England, where the same girl meets them. Here they are received by the Holy Pope, who also wants to know what era is coming. Jin scientifically proves that the planet that needs to be saved has 3 suns. When the planet revolves around one sun, the time of order comes. But the gravity of the other 2 suns pulls it off its orbit, and the time of chaos begins. The Pope does not like her conclusions and orders to burn the heretic, but then flames erupt outside, and a girl on a burning horse rides into the church. She screams that there are 3 suns in the sky and the world is perishing. Jin and Rooney are saved because they were right, as confirmed by the game guard. The civilization perished, but they understood the structure of this world system, so they can move on to the next level. The inspector realizes that the game is a tool for recruitment in searching for the best minds. Meanwhile, Augie receives a warning of dismissal if she does not return to quantum research, and the scientist decides to resume experiments, but again the countdown to her demise appears. After that, Augie finally stops the experiments. Jin and Rooney find themselves on the 3rd level of the game, at the residence of Kublai Khan, in front of which his warriors are lined up. Jin tells the Khan that this task is unsolvable, but another scientist begins to prove it, which is helped by giant human abacuses. 30 million soldiers turn flags to one of 2 sides. Rooney immediately understands. These are 1s and 0s. This is a human computer. The program for calculating solar orbits is launched, from which it follows that the era of order will come in 8 months. After fast-forwarding time to check the theory, the Khan, believing his court scientist, orders to throw the arriving pair into boiling water. But suddenly 3 suns line up in a row, and the era of chaos begins. The civilization perishes again despite all the calculations of the court scientist. And then Jin realizes the goal of the game is not to save the planet but to save the people. The game guard appears, confirming her conclusions, and invites them to the next level. Evans is informed about 2 new promising players, and he orders them to be invited to a meeting. After that, he returns to the conversation with the aliens, whom Evans calls the Lord. Evans tells the aliens a fairy tale about Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf, from which the aliens conclude that humans have lost their survival instinct since they have made contact with another civilization from deep space. The man reminds that it was done by one woman, and the Lord, after a pause, decides that fearlessness leads to extinction. Therefore, humanity must learn to fear. Jin and Rooney meet the recruiter, who congratulates them on advancing to the next level. Jin has realized the purpose of the game, and the answers to the rest of the questions will be found on the 4th level. The pair puts on the helmets and finds themselves in a desert. The game guard and the girl inform them that Jin was right. The 3-body problem has no solution. Having 3 suns, the planet is inevitably doomed. Therefore, they decided to look for a new home. They built thousands of starships, and this is the last hope of their civilization. But without the help of Earthlings, they cannot survive, and the girl asks people to help her kind. The puzzled people take off their helmets, and the recruiter confirms that this is all reality. The aliens, the Santi, are already heading here, and they created the game to tell Earthlings their story and prepare for the meeting with new neighbors. Rooney considers this a lie and refuses to play further, while Jin receives an invitation to the meeting. Meanwhile, Rooney returns home, not noticing that the inspector is following his house. Rooney goes up to the 2nd floor and suddenly sees the recruiter there, who pushes the guy onto a glass wall and kills him, and she disappears from the video. Friends learn about Rooney's death. The inspector reports that there is no image of the killer on any of the video cameras, and asks Jin to go to the meeting as a spy to arrest the killers of their friend. Later, the inspector reports that they found Evans's ship, on which he, along with 1,000 followers, has been living in international waters for the last 30 years. That's why he is so hard to track down. At the same moment, Evans receives a warning from the Lord that his enemies know about the upcoming meeting. But there is no need to fear, his people will be protected. Evans calls the enemies pests, which he has to explain to the aliens because they associate this word with bugs that can be simply crushed. Remembering the fairy tale about Little Red Riding Hood read to him by Evans, the Lord concludes that all humans lie, and they cannot coexist with liars. They are afraid of people. The Lord falls silent and no longer responds to Evans. Jin goes to the appointed place to meet with the followers of the aliens. The founder of their movement is invited to the stage, and Jin is surprised to see Wenjie. The woman begins her speech, promising salvation from the Santi, who will arrive in 400 years, but they need to prepare the Earth so that the aliens can receive it as a gift. In the midst of her speech, the police burst into the room. Wenjie orders her people to obey, but when the recruiter sees the police taking Jin away, she realizes that the scientist is a traitor and opens fire. Chaos ensues, people die, but their leader Wenjie calmly watches it. Jin finds the inspector and takes her away. The detainees are put into cars, not noticing that the recruiter is not among them, who will return to the story later. On one of the days, the inspector interrogates Wenjie, who confesses to receiving a warning from the aliens and sending them an invitation to Earth, as humanity is incapable of saving itself. The Lord, that is, the aliens, allowed her to be captured because apparently she is no longer of any use. Evans turned out to be Vera's father, and Jin is needed by them because she is considered the best physicist. After Wade's report, they conclude that Evans must have kept all records of his negotiations with the aliens. But how to capture his ship? It's clear that while the special forces will be storming the ship, Evans will simply destroy all the evidence. And the ship is just approaching the Panama Canal, with the Lord still not making contact. The inspector asks Augie to help the government and resume the production of nanofibers. Together, they go to her laboratory, and the girl turns on the equipment. Contrary to her fear, the countdown to her demise in the case of developing ultra-strong nanofibers does not appear. Later, Wade, with the help of a team of naval soldiers, installs the system developed by Olgi on the shore of the Panama Canal, disguising it as old columns. The girl suffers from a guilty conscience because of the children and women on board, but Wade reminds her of the fate of all humanity. And then the ship enters the canal. On Augie's command, columns with invisible, ultra-strong nanofiber strings rise above the water, but no visible effect is observed. And when the military already thinks that the technology does not work, the invisible strings start cutting everything that comes under them. The invisible death destroys metal and bodies with equal relentlessness. Evans, realizing that something terrible is happening, manages to take the disc with the recording of the negotiations, but dies in the ship's hold. The ship is carried ashore, where it crumbles into a huge burning heap. Later, the wreckage is searched, and the disc is found at Evans's corpse. Specialists of the administration try to decrypt it, and when they are already in despair, it suddenly opens. And the aliens themselves did it. Wade tells Wenjie everything, who is still confident that the aliens will help the Earthlings. And then the man lets her listen to the recordings of Evans's conversations with the aliens. The woman hears with horror that the aliens cannot live with humans because humans are liars. Later, Wade brings Jin to headquarters to show her the decrypted materials about a mysterious Sophon. In the movie plot, this is an elementary subatomic particle capable of moving at the speed of light. The woman suggests the chief put on a helmet, and they find themselves in a desert where they are awaited by the game's guardian. She says that the aliens are not at all like humans, and also reports that their species is doomed. They have to fly to Earth for another 400 years, but during this time humans will manage to create the newest weapon, capable of destroying the aliens, because progress on Earth moves at a speed unimaginable for their species. After all, the Earth's world is stable, unlike the constantly dying planet Santi. That's why they decided to destroy Earth science, for which they invented Sophon. There are more than 3 dimensions in the universe, which are folded in such a way that they are not visible, but Santi has the technology to unfold them. They focus unimaginable energy for humans on one proton and open it in a higher dimension, after which it becomes gigantic. And using this technology, Santi created artificial intelligence the size of an entire planet and reduced it to the size of an elementary particle. And now Sophon is demonstrating its capabilities on Earth. All of Santi's resources went into creating 4 Sophons, each pair of which are connected by the effect of quantum entanglement. 2 remained with Santi, 2 were sent to Earth. Everything that people see and hear, the aliens see and hear simultaneously, even if they are separated by light years. Sophons have almost no mass and they are easy to accelerate to the speed of light, so they recently reached Earth and infiltrated all the laboratories where the planet's best minds work. So soon, science will be destroyed because instead of truth, people see wonders. The world is entangled in illusions. People see what Santi wants to show them. They are everywhere and constantly observe processes, revealing human lies. So soon, Earthlings will learn to be afraid again. Jin and Wade take off their helmets and exit virtual reality. Around the world, gadgets start to turn off. A message appears on all video panels calling people bugs, and the sky is covered with an unknown substance which transforms into something resembling a huge eye. And only the wounded but alive recruiter rejoices at this. Upon learning that aliens were heading towards Earth, the world was thrown into turmoil. Riots broke out, which the police and the army had to quell. Despite assurances that the aliens would not arrive for another 400 years, Earthlings are preparing to declare that they are not bugs. Funds are being organized everywhere to raise money to fight the aliens, although some believe in Santi's good intentions. On one such day, the inspector brings scientist Jin to Wenjie, who concludes that the professor is simply a traitor to the human race. Under the leadership of Wade, the main headquarters for the defense of humanity is being set up. He gathers the best scientists on the planet and announces the start of the war with Santi. Despite the aliens having Sophons, humans have a chance. The first thing to do is to gather information, for which a probe will be sent to meet the Santi fleet. But for this, its speed must be no less than 1% of the speed of light. Hearing that scientists do not believe in such a possibility, Wade summons Jin and gives her the task of developing such a probe. And the girl does it. She arrives at the headquarters and demonstrates her idea. The probe must have a sail and get acceleration by following a predetermined trajectory where nuclear charges will be waiting for it. Of course, this will be very expensive, but it is possible. Meanwhile, stores start selling out of products, and enterprising merchants have announced the sale of stars to collect money from billionaires. One day, friends gather at the home of Will, who is dying of cancer, trying to cheer him up. However, Jin has another goal, to persuade Ogi to create a sale of ultra-strong nanofibers for her probe, which her friend categorically does not want to do. But after Will's intervention, Ogi changes her mind, as the friend is convinced that it is being done for the common good. Jin realizes that the probe, upon reaching the Santi fleet, will not be able to slow down, to which Wade declares that the aliens will simply take it, as they will send in it a human head, that is, a brain. Later, Wade invites scientists to the laboratory, where a Russian scientist shows the results achieved by cryofreezing. The chimpanzee subjected to it wakes up safely and even demonstrates an intact intellect, after which Wade finally reveals his plan. He will go into freezing and will wake up from time to time to check how his plan for preparing to save humanity is going. At this time, Augie develops a new technology that allows making a huge and strong canvas of nanofibers, which will allow Jin's idea to be realized. The time comes when it is necessary to decide on the choice of the first person who will go to meet the aliens. A physicist scientist who is ready for death is needed. It turns out that Wade has long been thinking about Will's candidacy, who is dying anyway. Sometime later, Jin comes to Will and tries to dissuade him from participating in the flight, but the guy wants to bring some benefit with his death. Meanwhile, Wenjie confesses to Saul that her daughter died when she found out that her mother had called the aliens to Earth. Then she says goodbye and leaves forever. Will undergoes tests and refuses to sign the oath of allegiance to humanity. What if the Santi turn out to be better than people think? But it turns out that Wade needed a candidate loyal to the aliens, so that they would definitely take him aboard. The wounded recruiter hides in a lonely trailer in the forest, and one day the game warden addresses her from the TV screen. The Lord has not forgotten his followers, and there will be an important task for her. One day, Saul goes to see off a friend, and when they stop briefly, a scooter flies at the guy. Saul falls and thus is saved from being hit by a car that has lost control. Later, the inspector informs him that in China, the recruiter killed Wenjie, and now there was an attempt on him, although Saul has no idea who needs it. Nevertheless, the inspector forces him to put on a bulletproof suit and takes him to the UN office, where the guy learns that today the launch of the program developed by Wade called Empty Gaze will be announced. The thing is that the alien Sophons can see and hear literally everything, but they are not able to penetrate a person's thoughts. Therefore, the management has chosen several people who will plan the strategy of victory, not revealing it to anyone. They will receive unlimited resources and will be able to carry out any ideas not contradicting the laws. Saul learns that he is one of the participants in the Empty Gaze project and tries to refuse this honor, but the UN leader assures that there is no mistake and leaves. But at the exit to the building, he is shot at. Only the bulletproof suit saves him. Later, Saul asks to bring the killer to him. It turns out that this is a follower of the aliens, and he did it by order of the Lord's army. Saul still tries to refuse the position, but he seems to be not heard. Moreover, the UN secretary declares that no one knows why exactly he was chosen. Strange, of course, and who should know then? Then Saul asks to be taken to the Cosmodrome to see off Will. More precisely, what's left of him, his brain. And the recruiter finds an alien virtual reality helmet in her trailer and puts it on. Meanwhile, Will's head is placed in a probe that is preparing for takeoff. All 300 bombs are lined up in orbit and the countdown begins. And the launch is made. At first, everything goes according to plan. The first stages were dropped, the nanoparachute was activated, acceleration begins. The first explosion was successful, the second and third too, and suddenly there is an accident on the probe and it deviates from the trajectory. Jin is in despair and Wade leaves, whispering something to her. Later, he is on a plane where the game warden comes to him. The aliens recognized him as a strong leader, and when they arrive, he will be part of their plan. They will always be nearby and will show him what he wants to see until his death. In the evening, Jin and Saul grieve by the pool when the inspector appears, orders them both to get into the car, and takes them to a place where an incredible number of bugs live, because bugs are the ones who always survive, although they are poisoned and crushed. So the inspector suggests drinking to the bugs, and that's where the first season ends. The series is based on the first book by Liu Cixin from the Three Body Problems series. The world has already seen the Chinese version of the series, but Netflix loves to make series with its own vision. Moreover, there will most likely be a continuation. A man discovers a loophole in the universe and travels back in time to retrieve his wife and job, while also finding out the winning lottery numbers to become wealthy. I think you and I can do this together the right way. 2016. Attorney Patrick Landry introduces his partner, Philip Grimmer, to Evelyn's sister. Love at first sight happens, although the girl warns of her upcoming departure to Prague and asks not to get attached. 6 years later, the couple wakes up in the same bed. Phil immediately rushes to his laptop while Ev answers a call from her mother, who invites them to dinner for her birthday. However, Phil, as always, doesn't listen to his wife. His mind is preoccupied with work issues. Realizing this, the woman allows her husband not to go with her and asks him to repeat it on camera. Later, Philip argues with the builders who can't seem to finish the renovation of their house. The foreman complains about the absence of the homeowner's brother Andy, whom they hired at his request, and irritated Phil promises to find another carpenter. On the way to work, Phil justifies Andy in every way, ignoring his wife's request to turn left, which leads to a traffic jam. Ev says she's taking the subway because she needs to go somewhere else. Philip, on the other hand, goes to his brother, who overslept. The crucial thing is that he hasn't consumed alcohol, which is strictly forbidden for him because he's an alcoholic. After sending his brother to work, Phil rushes to the company as it's an important day for them. He texts his wife, hoping she's already there, but she asks for a conversation which her husband once again doesn't hear. Later, they all gather at the same table because they work for the same company they own. Patrick complains about the lack of a secretary in their team, so Ev has to work much more. Still, Phil reminds them that today they will make a deal with Kiss Company, and money won't be a problem anymore. In the evening, Patrick presents his part of the presentation, while Phil works on his own. Finally, after finishing everything, the man goes home, only to find the bedroom painted blue and his wife asleep. In the morning, Ev wakes him up with a question about the bedroom color. However, her husband refuses to discuss this trivial matter and rushes to meet with representatives of the Kiss Company, which specializes in building mines for valuable minerals. The lawyers are convinced that they are the best to mediate with the locals who oppose the project. Afterward, Phil rushes home with champagne to celebrate their success with his wife, but Ev meets him with her things packed, as she intends to leave him. She reminds him of numerous instances when he ignored her interests and departs. Phil roams around the house, not knowing what to do, but then remembers the invitation from his mother-in-law and goes to Evelyn's parents' home. However, the woman refuses to talk to him, and to prevent a scandal, Patrick takes his friend to a bar. He confesses that he knew about his sister's intentions but kept quiet because of a contract. Disheartened, Phil heads to the restroom, where he stumbles upon an ad inviting him to use Plan B and correct his mistakes. All evening, he tries to find his wife, but she is nowhere to be found, and she doesn't answer his calls. The man dials the agency's number and, not entirely sure what he's doing, names the date of the day he'd like to return to. Specifically, yesterday morning. In the morning, Phil wakes up to find Andy working in his living room. Due to the events of the previous day, his head isn't functioning well, and he is surprised to read a message from Plan B. Then, there's a knock on the door, and two identical guys appear on the doorstep, grabbing Phil and dragging him into a van parked outside. After this, he wakes up 2 days earlier. Bewildered, Phil, without allowing his wife to finish, agrees to go to her mother's birthday party, which astonishes Evelyn. He also requests the foreman to find a replacement for his brother. On the way, stuck in traffic again, he follows his wife and discovers her at a clinic, where a surprised Ev mentions a delay. Phil doesn't understand why she didn't tell him earlier, but she suggests discussing it later. He waits for her in the car, where his wife admits she considered their relationship over. Her husband pleads for another chance and asks her to remind him what color she wanted for the bedroom. He then calls the foreman, who has already painted the walls blue, orders him to stop, and later fires Andy. At work, Phil takes on all of Ev's extra work, which leaves him with no time to complete his part of the presentation. While his wife goes to meet a friend, he rushes home and paints the walls in her favorite color. Catching him in the act, Evelyn is surprised, but counts it as an effort. Furthermore, he apologizes for her having to do something she doesn't love, despite always dreaming of being a musician. He suggests she resume playing the cello. The woman is completely taken aback. In the morning, Phil confesses that he hasn't finished his part of the presentation. Patrick tries to fix the situation, but Kiss refuses to sign a contract with the lawyers. Later, the family goes to a formal dinner where Phil raises a toast to the family. Patrick admits that he had a relationship with one of the Kiss executives for the sake of the contract, even though he has a family, and they still have a chance. On the way home, Ev thanks her husband for his efforts to save their family, and the couple loves each other. In the morning, the wife starts searching the internet for a cello and a good tutor when cries come from downstairs. The angry Andy has come to confront his brother who fired him, which means he won't be able to pay child support or see his daughter. At this point, Patrick calls and reminds him that everyone is already waiting for him. Andy leaves, and Ev expresses her grievances since her husband had promised to pay for both the repairs and her desires. The preoccupied Phil promises to sort everything out. 3 years ago, Phil and Ev spend a vacation in the Caribbean. They are completely happy, and the woman suggests getting married right there. Phil even tries to give her a ring, but he gets scared of something and backs out of his intention. In 2022, Phil shows Ev the cello he has repurchased for her, which she had once sold, and promises that everything will be very good for them. Afterward, he checks on his brother, whom he got a job, and they are very pleased with his performance. Andy asks him to pass a gift to his daughter because his wife spotted him drunken and hasn't allowed them to meet. Andy's wife doesn't believe in her ex-husband's potential for change, but Phil persuades her otherwise and gives the gift to his niece. Later, he brilliantly presents and Kiss signs a contract with them, provided that they find a good lawyer who will exclusively represent them. In the evening, Patrick informs Phil that he has made arrangements with a highly reputed lawyer and asks him to attend a meeting. It turns out to be Miranda Delano, which Phil receives with visible tension. The reason is that he outplayed her in court, and the woman hasn't forgotten that. Furthermore, it's evident that Miranda has a liking for Phil, who agrees to have her join their firm. In the morning, the man meets the new secretary hired by Patrick and finds him with the representative from Kiss, who approves of Miranda's invitation. She has come to provide them with the addresses of 2 property owners who refuse to sell and thus obstruct the scheduled construction. On the way, Phil tries to convince Patrick to reconsider Miranda, but he can't understand the reasons for this. The couple manages to persuade one of the stubborn property owners, while Evelyn begins taking her first lessons, which makes it difficult for her to fulfill her duties at the firm. Meanwhile, the second property owner sends lawyers and refuses to sell. In the evening, Ev comes home later than planned because she met with a friend and again refuses to discuss the appearance of a child. Meanwhile, Patrick rents a good apartment for the secretary within walking distance of the office, persuading the young woman that she is indispensable. Later, the lawyers meet with representatives of Kiss, who point out a mistake in the documents made by Ev. Patrick informs them that Miranda is on her way to their office at the moment. Phil rushes there but doesn't manage to prevent the meeting of the 2 women. Later, Phil points out Ev's mistake, which is why they had to seek a competent lawyer, since she won't be able to work soon. The woman refuses to talk, and Phil calls Plan B to prevent the hiring of Miranda, but it turns out his credit card is empty. He buys flowers and goes to his wife, who is upset that Miranda has re-entered their lives. It turns out that Ev received a message from Phil to Miranda by mistake, where he confessed his desire to be with her. Although her husband argued that there was nothing between them, she can't stand to hear the rival's name. She gave up her career to be with him, and Phil doesn't appreciate it, bringing Miranda into their firm. But the husband reminds her that she chose him over her career, and now he is the one fighting for their relationship. In the morning, he apologizes to his wife and shows her the ring, purchased even before their trip to the Caribbean. He talks about the cancellation of the offer to Miranda, and then goes to the lawyer to inform her that she won't be able to work at their firm. His next destination is the home of the second property owner, where he discovers that their new secretary is the daughter of the stubborn man. After listening to her, he begins to lean towards the decision to sell the house. After that, Phil informs Patrick that he and Ev are going on vacation and the offer to Miranda is cancelled. He tells Evelyn the same thing, confessing that he was flattered by the attention of a famous lawyer. He asks for the child to still be a part of their plans, and Ev agrees, packing for the trip. They arrive at the same place where once upon a time, Philip was going to propose. Upon reaching the shore, he presents Ev with the ring. However, she recalls the feelings she experienced upon learning about Miranda and admits that she cheated on him. Phil throws the ring away and leaves. Returning home, Phil learns that the public is in an uproar over Kiss's intention to open the mine and accuses the lawyers of deception. Evelyn tries to talk to Phil, and he finally agrees to listen to her in exchange for the name of her lover. Ev reminds him of a client who was upset about his divorce and hit a woman on the way home. So, his lawyer, Terrence, showed interest in her. They had a brief fling, but it didn't last long. She asks her husband for forgiveness, but Phil is unforgiving, even though he was busy with Miranda at the time. The man remembers how the lawyer gave him her address, but he didn't go to her back then. Ev continues to remember how she asked for his help because she felt a lump in her chest and was very afraid of cancer. Her husband just brushed off her fears at the time, but Phil suddenly asks about the timing of her affair and concludes that the child inside her is not his, as they always used protection. At this time, Patrick ends his relationship with one of the Kiss leaders he got involved with for the contract. Phil has to search for his seemingly drunk brother and calm down their selfish mother, who reminds him of the day when Andy, his brother, stormed into her house, causing trouble. They accuse each other of mutual inattentiveness, and Phil ends up taking the blame again. Later, he conducts an interview with a candidate for the lawyer role who proposes entirely unacceptable terms. After this, Phil fires Ev because it was her mistake that got them into this situation. A quarrel ensues, and the man admits that he shouldn't have bought the house with her. Patrick learns about this and reminds him that half the firm is his. But Phil doesn't want to hear anything and calls Plan B to prevent the purchase of the house. Soon, Patrick calls him, revealing that he had been keeping his family a secret from his lover, who saw them with the children today. This could cause problems with Kiss. On TV, reports about protests against the mine construction are broadcast, which Ev interrupts, reminding Phil of the day they didn't use protection. So, the child is definitely his. And right at that moment, the twins from Plan B ring the doorbell. Phil finds himself back on the day when they were inspecting the house, and he decided not to buy it. Later, Ev asks him to help examine her breast because she thinks there is a lump. He advises his wife to see a doctor and heads to court, where his opponent is Miranda. Phil counters all her objections and proposes to meet and discuss the terms. During the conversation, he receives a call from Andy, and Phil remembers that today, an unpleasant scene will take place at his brother's wife's house. He rushes there and prevents the scandal. He returns home late, and Evelyn, who has woken up, comforts him, sympathizing with his problems with his brother. In the morning, she initiates a conversation about the house, but Phil avoids answering because he constantly envisions Ev's infidelity. The next day, he tells his brother that Ev might be unfaithful to him, but Andy doesn't understand this perspective. Why worry about something that hasn't happened? Later, he wins the court case, and Miranda invites him to dinner, after which the two of them end up at her place. But suddenly, Phil sees Evelyn's face before him and realizes that he cannot betray the woman he loves. He goes back home, confesses his love to Ev, and in the morning, he suggests that they get back to making music, as that's what she had always wanted. He also agrees to buy the house they both liked. He easily wins all the cases that follow, amazes his wife with his foresight, and decides to quit working for Kiss. Andy returns to the family, and Phil becomes the lawyer for the man involved in the past accident with a woman. He comforts his client and offers to drive him home, as the man is deeply upset and has been drinking. They pause at the spot where the tragedy happened, and the woman calmly crosses the road. After dropping off his client at home, Phil drives to Terrence's law firm just to see him. In the evening, he buys flowers and arrives on time to conceive a child. The next day, Patrick informs that he secured a contract to represent the residents against Kiss, and Ev heads for an audition. Over time, the couple's relatives visit their new home and learn about Ev's pregnancy. They all raise a toast for the cellist's success, but Phil still can't shake off the visions of her being unfaithful to him. Evelyn starts rehearsals with the chamber orchestra, and her conductor pays close attention to her. Meanwhile, lawyers discover that Kiss is buying land around the designated mining areas. But why? Patrick learns about Kiss Company's data and starts monitoring it. One day, he follows a woman and stumbles upon a gathering of people who want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for cancer research, where he meets the woman. As for Phil, he goes to meet Ev after her rehearsal and observes her warm relationship with the conductor, Alejandro, which once again triggers jealousy in him. Moreover, she refuses to leave because she needs to rehearse a lot. Patrick, on the other hand, continues to get to know the corporation's expert in chemistry, who reveals information about the mineral extracted by Kiss. It's not the mineral itself that's dangerous, but what surrounds it, which is why the business people are buying up the neighboring lands. This means that the people living nearby will undoubtedly suffer if mineral mining begins. At the same time, Ev spends more time with the orchestra, which, of course, bothers Phil. Nevertheless, he tries to control his jealousy. One day, he attends an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to support Andy and hears him speak about his brother, who is a role model for him. Andy introduces his brother to the organizer of the meetings, and Phil brings up the issue of infidelity that never happened. Andy acknowledges that there is a problem. As for Phil, a new obsession develops. Now he envisions Ev with Alejandro. Patrick continues his relationship with the expert and gets to know her seriously ill partner, earning the woman's complete trust. Meanwhile, people from the surrounding area come to Phil, scared and refusing to sue Kiss, which makes him late for Evelyn's performance. This causes her anger and another argument. But the couple makes amends, and their relationship is restored until the moment when Ev has to leave for a tour. Phil notices that she doesn't look well, but she attributes it to tiredness. Later, Patrick announces that the expert revealed that her safety report was a fake, which means they have the corporation in their hands. He intends to threaten Kiss and demand a substantial sum from them. Phil reminds him that without the girl's testimony, the recording won't be considered evidence. With no place to go after work, and his wife not answering his calls, Phil remembers the meeting place and decides to go there to talk to the organizer. The man listens to his confessions about not trusting his wife and laments that, unfortunately, one cannot turn back time. He advises Phil to either accept the woman or let her go and move on. In the morning, he witnesses a commotion in Patrick's office. The expert has no intention of confirming her statements, which means the information gathered by the lawyer holds no weight. Then Patrick suggests intimidating Kiss, to which Phil recommends hiring their own expert and conducting analyses. Patrick takes it upon himself to go to the corporation and tells them that he knows everything and demands hush money. Meanwhile, Phil receives a call from Quebec in the middle of the night, informing him that Ev is in the hospital due to premature labor. He rushes there and learns that the situation was triggered by an infection. The woman is out of danger, but their baby girl is very weak and gets sent to a specialized clinic. At the same time, Patrick discovers a noose hanging on a swing set in his yard. Evelyn struggles with the aftermath, while Phil organizes her transfer to the same clinic where their daughter is. Patrick nearly hits a car in the parking lot. Meanwhile, the doctor informs Ev that her daughter is very weak and is unlikely to survive. The cause of this was a urinary tract infection in the mother, which triggered a kidney disease in the baby. Phil tries to ascertain the exact timing of when the illness started, but the doctor doesn't understand and refuses to answer. Later, all the relatives come to support Ev, and Patrick asks Phil to be closer to his sister. After returning home, Patrick finds a box with pictures of his family. This night, Ev confesses that she has felt unwell for a long time, but skipped the doctor's appointment due to her tour schedule. Phil asks the doctor for a prognosis, and she admits that, in all likelihood, Ev could have prevented what happened by coming in for an examination. Phil calls Plan B. 5 years ago, the couple discusses the possibility of having children, but Evelyn wants to ensure they have everything they need. Phil promises that when their children arrive, they will grow up in a big house with everything they need. In the present, Phil places an order and is informed that the agents will arrive tomorrow. In the meantime, he goes to the boxing gym, takes out a tiny girl, and promises that he will definitely save her. He makes the same promise to his wife, who is on the verge of despair. Meanwhile, Patrick receives instructions to go to a motel and check in under a false name. He complies, calls Phil, and tells him that he went to Kiss, and now he's being threatened. He asks for help, but Phil doesn't want to assist someone who acted against his advice. The next day, Phil waits for the Plan B agents, but they are nowhere to be found. Evelyn asks him to come to her, but he can't leave the house. He waits and starts cutting some information on his arm. They arrive late in the evening, and Phil finds himself at the moment when his wife was getting ready for her tour. He immediately tells Ev that she can't go because she has a fever, but she refuses to listen. Phil refers to the vision and then says that he has already experienced this. He tries to stop her, but Evelyn falls down the stairs just when her friend enters the house. Thankfully, there are no injuries to Evelyn, but the mere fact that her husband allegedly pushed her causes a real shock. The women literally rush to the orchestra's van, not giving Phil a chance to explain. Then he gets into his car and rushes after them, listening to Patrick's message about the false kiss report. He asks his partner not to threaten the corporation and promises to handle everything, but realizing that he can't stop Evelyn, he turns onto another road, calls his mother, and asks her to inform Ev that he had an accident and was taken to a clinical hospital. The woman calls Ev, and she, along with her friend, rushes to the hospital where her doctor, whom Phil tracked down, is already waiting for her. She insists on a checkup while Phil buys a lottery ticket. Evelyn meets her husband with suspicion because he looks quite well for someone who was in an accident, but Patrick becomes the center of his attention, eager to find out how he learned about the fake reports. However, Phil asks to postpone all the questions because Evelyn is in danger. Then the doctor informs them that she has detected an infection, and this is a real miracle. Had they come later, things could have gone very badly. The expectant mother must adhere to bed rest. Phil has to come up with an explanation for noticing discharge on her underwear, thereby suspecting an illness and then having a dream in which their daughter was born prematurely and died because Ev didn't undergo an examination. Ev doesn't believe him, but Phil finds excuses for all her questions. The most important thing is that they are both fine. At this moment, the lottery results are shown on TV, and Phil rolls up his sleeve, concealing the numbers cut into his skin. Later, he wins a huge jackpot, but keeps it a secret from everyone. In this storyline, he goes to kiss himself, and, threatening to carry out an independent investigation, demands that they abandon the construction of the mine in the populated area. Later, Evelyn expresses her frustration at having to stay in bed for months, but Phil reminds her of her words about not being able to cope if something happens to the baby. Evelyn is surprised. She didn't say such things. Meanwhile, the lawyer persuades people not to give in to kiss and to preserve the environment for their children and grandchildren, although Patrick is in favor of taking the corporation's money and ending the resistance because he needs the money to pay off his mortgage. But Phil remains resolute and reminds them about conscience. 2 days later, he goes to pick up Evelyn, not realizing that he is being followed. He picks up his wife, who doesn't understand what has happened to her partner, who tries to control her every move. Evelyn is surprised to see a new car, and Phil almost hits Patrick's car in the parking lot. A letter with photos of his family is found at the door. He calls a specialist to install security systems in the house, which surprises Evelyn. He has to confess that Kiss is threatening him. He tells Patrick the same thing. He then offers him money to leave the firm. The partner is utterly puzzled, and Phil gives an interview where he reveals everything about the deal with the corporation and the fake reports. A commotion ensues, and now it's pointless and even dangerous to threaten Phil. Evelyn misses him more and more, so Phil brings a stack of videotapes and books to the house and hires a housekeeper and a nurse for her. She doesn't understand where the money came from, and in the meantime, Phil buys a new house and buys out Patrick's share for a very good price. One day, he catches Evelyn at home with Alejandro and her friend, with whom she's rehearsing, and again, he experiences jealousy. Unable to stand it, he takes Evelyn to the new house and admits that he won $25 million. He shows her the house, especially proud of the children's room when Evelyn's water breaks. He takes her to the hospital, where Evelyn gives birth to a healthy girl. 7 years ago, Evelyn wakes up with a hangover in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. But Evelyn has no intention of starting a relationship, and today she needs to be at a party celebrating the opening of her brother's law firm, where she meets Phil and eventually enters into a relationship. In the present, Phil joyfully takes care of the child and establishes a fund to help sick children to prevent sorrow and pain. However, his transformation into a politician leads to Evelyn's feeling of misunderstanding and even disapproval. Patrick also hopes for his return to the firm, although he acquired it entirely. And one day, Evelyn confesses that he is suffocating her with his care. He always knows what to do and makes her follow his advice. Then Phil tells her about the Plan B agency, which makes her laugh. Naturally, she doesn't believe his words and confesses that she, too, would like to move back in time, never abandon music, not live in the house, not have a child, and not be with him in the first place. Phil is shocked by her admission and suggests they go back to the past, right now. He dials a number, but Evelyn thinks he's crazy and leaves. At home, the woman packs her things and prepares her daughter, despite all her husband's promises to change. He is ready to give her everything as long as she doesn't leave, but it's all in vain, and Evelyn goes to her parents' house. For the first time, Phil can't decide which period in time he needs to go to in order to fix this. He spends whole days at home, staring at the ceiling when Andy comes and tries to help his brother in any way possible. This ends in a drinking binge and the realization that no amount of money and effort can change the present. He starts to get heavily involved in the foundation's work, allocating money for the construction of a children's hospital, when Patrick suddenly shows up with Evelyn because Phil demanded full custody of their daughter. He warns that no one will be able to prove that Evelyn is a bad mother, but a friend of his wife saw him push her down the stairs. Phil offers Patrick $200,000, but for the first time in his life, Patrick is in no need of money, unable to comprehend how his friend reached this point. Evelyn shows up at rehearsals and tells Alejandro that her relationship with Phil is over. However, the woman does not prevent Phil from communicating with their daughter after he has given up full custody. The man goes on outings with the little girl and takes her on weekends. Gradually, his relationship with Evelyn and Patrick improves, although Phil does not rush to sign a divorce agreement. One day, the man goes to a pool where children's classes are taking place and he participates in them, while Evelyn watches from the sidelines, understanding that Phil loves their daughter very much. The woman dedicates herself entirely to her creativity and socializing with friends, even though she disagrees that these years were wasted. However, Charlotte falls ill somehow, and the couple goes to the hospital, where a doctor, seeing how they care for the girl, calls them an excellent team. On the way back, Phil confesses his love to his wife, but she doesn't want to hear it. They manage to be parents but not a couple. After these words, Phil freezes at the wheel, and in the next moment, a collision occurs. His consciousness flickers on and off as he sees doctors, then Patrick, then doctors again, and Andy. Last of all, Evelyn comes in, wishing him to die as soon as possible. But soon Phil regains consciousness and asks Andy to take him home. Andy complies with his request, even though his brother has sustained quite severe injuries. At home, he finds the Plan B number and places an order. Andy can't understand what's happening, but his brother simply asks him to wait. In the morning, the doorbell rings, and the twins appear at the doorstep of Evelyn. They drag her into the van, and the woman wakes up with a hangover, in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. Evelyn can't understand how this was possible, and realizing she is in the past, she screams in horror. She bursts into her brother's party and throws a fit, accusing Phil of killing her daughter. Onlookers believe she has gone insane, and Phil even claims he is seeing her for the first time. Her friend believes she might have hit her head, but reminds her that it is time to fly to Prague, as she wanted. The woman packs up and starts a new life. 7 years later, she flies to Canada with Alejandro, whom she intends to marry and introduce to her parents. And at the same time, Phil meets his pregnant wife, Miranda, who had been meeting her ex-husband for business matters, which doesn't sit well with her current spouse. However, Miranda reminds him that she's here with him and has no intention of going anywhere. Besides, they're expecting a child. Phil apologizes because he's been trying hard not to control her every move. They go to a concert where Patrick and his family are also present, and he introduces Evelyn to his friend's family. Later, when they're alone, she confesses that she was very angry with him, but now she's grateful for what he did. She's happy in doing what she loves. It's at this point that Phil apologizes for both himself and Charlotte, indicating that everything that happened was not what it seemed. Many people dream of going back in time and changing something that ruined their lives, but does it always lead to a better outcome? There comes a time when humanity is faced with weather disasters and global wars that are slowly destroying people, and technology emerges that people use not to save an uncertain tomorrow but to return to the bright memories and emotions of yesterday. Nick Bannister goes to work where he is met by his assistant Emily Sanders, nicknamed Watts, who informs him that the fellow soldier is waiting for him. The man lost both legs in the recent global war and comes to Nick to take advantage of technology that allows him to return to a bright past left only in his memories. After all, few people dream of the future now because cities have flooded and wars have engulfed the world. The tank was originally a tool for interrogation and then became a means to relive the best moments of life all over again. Nick immerses the man in a time when he was healthy and cheerful, playing with his dog on the lawn of his father's house. When he comes to his senses, the man tries to pay Watts off with a new synthetic substance, Baka, but Nick provides his co-worker his services for free because their establishment is a success. Who wouldn't want to visit the past and see their dear and close people and relive the best moments of life?
But there are those who abuse the memories. One such person is Elsa, who comes almost daily to relive a night of love with a dear one. But one day a woman comes into the establishment who has lost her keys on her way home. The woman introduces herself as May and immediately attracts Nick's attention. She is immersed in her memories, and Nick looks at the customer's day, the wake-up call, breakfast, and the keys May puts in her bag. She drives to work, to the club, and drops her keys under the makeup table. Watts wants to stop the memories, but for some reason Nick asks her to keep going. He sees a woman crying before going on stage, but picks himself up and goes to the microphone. He listens mesmerized to her voice, then turns off the equipment. After she leaves, Watts discovers May's forgotten earrings and gives them to Nick. As the sun rises, flooded Miami turns into a ghost town. It is so hot during the day that people had begun to live at night. The fighting at the borders ended long ago, but passions still boil inside the cities, and riots occur more and more often. And prosecutors often turn to Nick for help because his equipment can be used to peer into the moments of crime. Today's client is a tycoon accused of starting a fire in one of the buildings, and his lawyers are seeking a ban on a cession of capacity. And the prosecutor's office can do nothing, even though the city is mired in problems, murders, and corruption. During the war, such tycoons bought up dry land for next to nothing, and the settlers had to survive as best as they could. The day would come when the ocean would take everything, but for now the flooded city could still be home. Nick comes to the club and finds May. He gives her the earrings and asks her why she cried before the show. The woman confesses that she always gets nervous before she goes on stage, and offers to walk her out. A close relationship develops between May and Nick, but one day the woman disappears without a trace. Watts worries about her partner, who begins to constantly delve into his memories to figure out where and how to find May. The colleague tries to get the man to come back to his life as their business begins to crack at the seams. New technologies emerging, clients are leaving. Even Elsa has disappeared somewhere and doesn't come for weeks, and he spends every day in the tank remembering May. He tries to forget her, but she won't come out of his mind. One day he remembers sharing with her his terrible memories of people dying in the surging waves, and she sympathized and understood him. He goes around places where he might have known something about May, but he gets the impression that the woman never existed. And the more truth he learns about his beloved, the more he doubts that he ever knew her at all. He goes back again and again to the time when they were together. Once he noticed bruises on her arm, but she excused herself by working hard in high heels. He had told her about the war and the trenches, and only now knows what true happiness is. One day he is roused from his dive by someone's insistent knocking, but while he's getting out of the tank there is no one at the front door. Suddenly he sees something shiny under the water and picks up May's earring. Watts can't believe that the woman lost the jewelry today. Apparently it's been lying under the door for a long time. And now they need to get busy because they've been summoned to interrogate a dealer named Holes who worked for Joe, the biggest supplier of vodka. The criminal is submerged in the tank and finds himself in a bar room, in the middle of which stands the chair of the chief mafioso of Orleans, St. Joe. Suddenly a familiar voice is heard, and Nick sees May. She sings for Joe, and he notices the woman. The events took place over 5 years ago, and despite Watts' objections, Nick asks to show the memories next. May is introduced to Joe, and he offers her vodka. May refuses, which enrages Holes, but Joe offers to apologize to the woman, and Joe's underling aims a gun at him. He apologizes, and Joe treats May to vodka again, and this time she agrees. At this moment, one of the police officers, losing his patience, pushes Nick away and asks Holes the main questions. But the bandit's brain shuts down, and the officers ask Nick to bring the criminal's mind back. Nick again asks to see May, and a scene emerges where the girl reminds him of what she once was, poor but clean and conscientious. But then she tried vodka and lost herself. Holes has no time to listen to her outpourings because Joe is waiting for him with the goods. But it's not in the safe because May has robbed her master. The last thing Holes remembers is May hitting him over the head. Watts is astonished. Didn't Nick know that his beloved was using substances? But he never noticed this weakness of hers, but now he knows where to find her. Nick goes to New Orleans, tormented by the thought that he didn't know the woman he loved at all. He comes to Joe, but he's greeted with distrust because he reeks of the military from a mile away. And Joe was once the one who was left to die in the tide by the military. He gives an order to drown Nick in the fish tank until he tells him the real reason for his visit. Nick confesses that he is looking for May, but this causes the merchant to laugh. Is it all because of this woman? He knows what she took from him, substances and money, but what did she want with Nick? The conversation with the bandit might have ended badly if Watts hadn't come to the rescue. A first-rate marksman, she quickly incapacitated Joe's fighters, shooting the mobster's favorite aquarium in the process. Nick struggles with his jailer, and as he prepares to engage in a firefight, it turns out that Watts has already dealt with everyone and mortally wounded Joe. By the request of the wounded man, the woman finishes him off, and the pair leave. But now Nick agonizes over the question, why did May come to him? He recalls telling her about the plates on which memories were recorded, and May shared one of them. When London flooded, she swam to Miami. But she didn't have a place to stay, so she somehow fell asleep on the boat. Someone untied her and the woman was swept out into the ocean. She would have died if she hadn't stumbled upon a lonely white house in the middle of the water not far from Florida Keys. The woman who lived there put her back on her feet, and it was the best thing that ever happened to her. And Nick had the memory of a song his grandfather sang, and he sang it for May. Nick plunges back into his memories again and again to figure out what the con artist stole. Watts can't understand his obsession. What does he have that May went to imitate a relationship for? Watts recalls May's last visit. At the time, the woman offered her alcohol because she wanted to fix the relationship. She saw that she didn't like her colleague Nick and candidly admits that she was addicted. To this, Watts admits that she worked in supply after the war. She needed to feed her daughter, so she went to soldier drones for the army. The woman then abused and once caused a fire. Her daughter was taken away by the relatives and Watts went back to the bottle. But thanks to Nick, she didn't drown in it. Feeling bad, Watts went to the bathroom, leaving May alone in the room. And she took advantage of this and broke into the vault using the access code, Nick's grandfather's tune. And that means the woman has been studying it hard and has been preparing for a robbery for a long time. They look through their file cabinet and discover Elsa's memories are missing. Nick goes looking for the woman and learns from her friend that Elsa was murdered and her baby boy is missing without a trace. The red-headed friend who took the boy was with the killer. Nick is increasingly plagued by the question, who was May really? A con artist? An addict? A murderer? Nick checks all the clues that might lead to May, and one day he is attacked by a man who, after beating him, advises him to forget about May as she did. Then he calls someone with the message that Nick won't bother them anymore. Watts manages to identify the attacker, a corrupt cop from Joe's entourage. They go to the prosecutor's office, but on the way they witness a disturbance. The land tycoon is dead, and the people who had hoped for relief learn that everything goes to the rich man's wife and son, and they have no intention of changing his policies. It turned out that Nick was acquainted with the rich man's wife, and seeing her reminded him of a clue that had long plagued his subconscious. The man from Elsa's memories was none other than the tycoon. And Watts finds data on the policeman named Booth who worked for the tycoon. Nick recognized him because the rich man's wife Tamara had once approached Nick as well, and then the rich man said the same words that Elsa had later said. It turns out that Rich wanted to get rid of the bastard child and hired Booth to do it, but it's going to be damn hard to prove. Nevertheless, Nick is determined to do it because May used him. He goes to visit the tycoon's widow who, like other rich people, lived on property protected by a dam. Nick is greeted by the butler and without letting him explain who he is, hands him the hat and jacket that all the men in the house wear. Puzzled, Nick walks into a room styled like the store where Tamara once met her fiancé. He realizes that Tamara has lost her mind and everything around her is rigged for her reality. Nevertheless, he tries to talk to her and asks her to tell him where Booth is. Then he opens the mirrors and the woman, seeing her reflection, comes to her senses for a moment. She knows that her husband ordered her to kill her former mistress and child because he did not want to share the inheritance. At this moment, Tamara's son arrives and Nick is thrown out, and he avoids death only because the butler was also ex-military. After remembering Tamara's reservation about human scum, Nick goes down to the old factory where those who have no place in society gather. Seeing a woman who looks like May, he follows her and finds Booth, who taunts him. He and May are people from another world and he will never find her. Booth jumps out the window and Nick runs after him. They meet on the roof and start a fight, but Booth jumps over to the next building. Nick repeats the trick and catches the bandit. They fight again until they end up in a flooded music room. And then Booth, along with the piano, falls through a hole in the floor and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Nick dives after him and frees him from the piano, but Booth hits him and Nick begins to sink while the bandit floats up. Nick sees May and hears her voice. Immediately he finds the strength and swims out to grab Booth, who was not expecting it. He plunges him into the tank, intending to find out the whole truth. He sees how Booth and May met in Miami. It was then that he hired the woman to find Elsa's memories. May met his army friend and the latter, over vodka, spilled everything he knew about Nick. He even whistled his friend's favorite song. It turns out that the woman knew and had everything in mind. All this time Nick was just a target. But in an instant flashback he suddenly discovers that May was resisting her because she was genuinely attracted to Nick. That's when the bruise on her arm appeared. And after she brought Elsa's memory tapes, Booth confessed that he intended to get rid of the woman and her son. That's when Booth killed Elsa, but May managed to intercept the boy and put him on the boat. She rescued the child and escaped from the murderer. May then went to Nick's house, knocking on the door, but she was already waiting for Booth, who promised to kill Nick if she did not go with him. That's when May dropped the earring, hoping Nick would find it. In the next flashback, Booth tries to get May to confess where she took the baby, and she suddenly talks about the house amidst the ocean. Nick realizes that this is a message for him. He steps into the illusion and May confesses her love for him while kissing Booth. Then, after pushing the bandit away, May swallows a handful of vodka and leaps from a height. Enraged, Nick retaliates against Booth in the most brutal way possible, by frying his brain with his most nightmarish memories of being burned alive on Joe's orders. Nick goes to the tycoon's house. He realizes who really killed Elsa. The rich man's son didn't want to share his inheritance, and he was the one who hired Booth. And Nick has all the proof. He was the one Booth called at the time, and it can be confirmed. The guy tries to pay him off, but Nick says his brother is alive, and the police have already found him in a cabin in the middle of the ocean, and they are coming for the killer soon. The guy pulls out a gun but hesitates to shoot and tries to kill himself, but he doesn't have the guts to do it either. Nick goes to Watts, who now works at the hospital, and confesses to killing Booth. He hands over the records of Elsa and May's murders and asks that it be given to the prosecutor's office. He regrets missing out on many good things and asks Watts to find her daughter and be with her. The news of the tycoon's son's crime was the last drop that overflowed the cup of people's patience, and a riot broke out in the town. But Nick withdrew from it all into memories, reliving again and again the happy moments of meeting May. Now elderly Watts and her granddaughter often come to his receptacle, while Nick tells May the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. The idea of the film makes us think that people are very different. Some deal with a bad present and an uncertain future and may not dwell on memories, while others need to constantly look back to the past in order to exist in the present. Choi, a young promising guy, goes for an interview at a large corporation. On the way, he contacts his fiancée, who wishes him good luck. And then, suddenly, right before his eyes, a man crossing the street gets hit by a car and flies right under Choi's feet. The guy tries to help him, but the poor man dies in Choi's arms. This shocks Choi so much that he can't even answer basic questions during the interview, and, naturally, he's turned down for the job. He spends the next 7 years searching for work, working as a laborer, waiter, and taxi driver to pay off his debts while his friends gain experience and create families. He sends out thousands of resumes, goes to interviews, and believes he'll find a good job. But time passes,
and nothing changes. One day, he goes for an interview at the same corporation as 7 years ago. After reading his resume, listing various odd jobs, the manager notes the guy's persistence, numerous certificates, and licenses he's obtained. Choi leaves the interview hopeful, but then he's told that his investments have completely burned down. In a fit of despair, he rushes to the investor to confront him and ends up breaking his doors. The neighbors call the police, but it's too late. Choi voluntarily handed his money to a scammer. Distraught, he walks to his fiance's house and sees her being dropped off by a man in a luxurious car. She notices Choi and offers him money for the time being. Upset, Choi asks his fiancée to forget him, as she shouldn't tie her life to such a failure, and he goes home. He finds all his belongings at the doorstep, as the apartment owner evicted him for non-payment. In the morning, he receives a message rejecting him from the job at the corporation. This finally drives Choi insane. He climbs to the rooftop, realizing that his life went awry on the day the man hit by the car died in his arms. Choi is no longer afraid of death. He takes a step forward and falls, and on the ledge, his phone rings, displaying his mother's name. Choi regains consciousness and darkness. Confused, he removes the blindfold and finds himself in a chair inside an airplane. An unknown face is displayed in the monitor. Suddenly, a girl appears, reading his last note. She announces that he's dead, but strongly disagrees that death is a way to end the pain. She transports Choi to a place where she intends to show him real suffering. They find themselves on a tall tower, with cries coming from below. She is the goddess of death and intends to punish him for insulting death. With those words, the girl throws Choi down and he falls into a horde of horrifying creatures in a sea of blood. He screams, fights off monsters, and he's back in the airplane cabin, facing the goddess of death. Choi learns that as punishment, he must die 12 times in different people's bodies. If he wants to avoid hell, he must try to survive in at least one of the given lives. Choi tries to object, but death disappears. The plane's engine starts shaking, and a terrified Choi puts on a life jacket, despite the flight attendant explaining that it's just turbulence. Soon, everything stabilizes. Choi looks around the plane's cabin and marvels at the expensive items. Then, an unfamiliar glowing object appears before him, containing memories and skills of the person whose body he now inhabits. Choi finds himself in the body of the second son of the owner of the corporation, where he was so eager to get a job. The guy realizes he can continue his life with all this wealth and agrees to live on. However, the plane's engine explodes. Choi manages to reach his seat and fastens his seatbelt as the flight attendant is carried away into a gap. The plane explodes and Choi dies in the flames. But immediately he's reborn in a vast dark space, facing a glowing door leading to hell. Death sits at a table, loading a gun with bullets that will kill him each time, allowing him to transfer to another body. The glowing stone he saw will provide him with memories and abilities of the person whose body he enters. Choi doesn't understand the rules of this game. How can he survive if all the other deaths are just as inexorable? But Death believes it's his problem now. If he doesn't survive, he'll end up in the hell she intends to show him. Choi sees a burning space filled with cries and pain, and cries himself for not understanding his guilt. And then Death confesses his guilt is that he arrived at death before she came to him, but he still has a chance not to go to hell. Death shoots, and Choi finds himself falling from a great height as a man. At first, he pleads for help, but then the glowing stone appears, and Choi realizes his new body is that of an extreme sportsman, agreed to make a parachuteless jump into a specially made net, televised worldwide. If he succeeds, the sponsor will pay him a huge sum. The glowing object penetrates Choi, and endows him with the abilities of an athlete. The guy is confident that he can do it all. However, he crashes right in front of the net, shocking viewers worldwide. Choi finds himself on the brink of hell once again. He's outraged. He didn't have the slightest chance to survive. Then the guy starts recounting that he was born into a poor family, couldn't find a job, and lost his fiancée. He had nothing to hold on to. Death mocks his enumerated problems and shoots him in the head. Choi finds himself in the body of a teenager this time. He then sees one of his classmates watching a video of the the crashed athlete and laughing at his death. A glowing stone appears, and Choi learns that he lives with his mother because his father died. The woman works hard to support her son, but he hates school because the class leader bullies him, and one day, after another beating, he decided to jump from the roof, and that's when Choi enters his body. Choi realizes that if he survives, he won't go to hell and can start over, but the class leader immediately reminds him to bring him some milk.
He needs some milk.
An indignant Choi grabs a chair and attacks the leader to teach him a lesson, but the leader's friends come to his aid. One of them, a tall, strong guy, beats up Choi, and no one comes to his rescue. During classes, Choi reflects on his situation and concludes that he first needs to gain the support of the strong guy. He returns home and, looking at the poor apartments, remembers his mother. He also grew up in poverty with a single mother, who is now completely alone. Having dinner with another mother, he sees his own and cries from the pain of loss. In the evening, he receives a message demanding money from the class leader, who constantly bullies Choi. The next day, Choi meets with the strong guy, and he explains that the class leader is friends with the strongest 11th grader, and he allows his henchmen to do whatever they want. During lunch, the leader again bullies Choi, and in front of the whole school, Choi pours noodles over his head. Shocked by such audacity, the leader orders the strong guy to catch Choi, but he suddenly refuses because he doesn't want to miss lunch. Realizing that no one is going to protect the leader, the others laugh at the now former leader. The strong guy remembers how Choi asked him not to interfere with what's about to happen. The former leader rushes to the 11th grader, who leads his gang to settle the matter. But upon seeing who his help was needed against, he's puzzled. Can't a schoolboy handle a little classmate on his own? Then why is he in his gang? The embarrassed former leader tries to attack Choi, but the strong guy steps in. The power of the foolish schoolboy has come to an end, and even his girlfriend prefers someone else now. Choi starts running to get stronger because he needs to be strong, and then, one evening, the former leader attacks him and kills him with a stone. Choi wakes up again on the brink of hell. He gets shot in the forehead and is reborn in a new body. He finds himself tied to a chair with a sack over his head. They torture him with water and then remove the bag, demanding to know where the girl and the money are. And when a hammer is raised above him, a glowing stone appears. Choi learns that he's in the body of a hitman. He once fell in love with the boss's girl, who asked him to help her escape. He hid the girl and the 10 billion won he stole from the boss and put in a secure place, but he got caught by the boss, and now the guy breaks free and attacks the thugs himself. He manages to turn off the lights and defeat the gang. Choi decides to find the stolen money, which he will use to start a new life. He opens the door and finds himself in a moving truck. Choi gets out on a motorcycle while the chase ensues. They corner him on a bridge, where he uses all of his skills to escape, causing a massive accident. Choi races through the night city on his motorcycle, but the pursuit doesn't let up. Then he enters a shopping mall, jumps into an elevator, and closes the doors before the pursuers can reach him. And when they finally catch up with him on the roof, he jumps straight into a pool. The boss orders to find the lucky guy, and he arrives at the pier, where a girl rushes into his arms, and when he tells her that the money is in the boat with lanterns, she shoots him. Choi finds himself at the gates of hell with a laughing death. But Choi is not so simple, because he didn't reveal the exact location of the money. In the next life, he hopes to find it. The guy dies and ends up in a prison cell. His friends warn him to behave well, or the murderer, a psychopath, will finish him off just 4 days before his release. Then, the psychopath enters this cell, and Choi recognizes him as the class leader who bullied classmates. Unable to contain himself, Choi attacks him. Other inmates drag him away, and then a glowing stone appears. Choi's new body is that of a guy who dreamed of becoming an MMA fighter, but his mother got into debt, and the guy agreed to commit a crime for someone else's money. The fighter was still a minor, so he got a suspended sentence for running over a pedestrian. However, during the trial, the victim died, and the guy received a real 2-year sentence. When the real culprit's lawyer came to him, the fighter threatened to expose him and demanded more money, and now Choi is trying to get the schoolboy to admit that he's not a scary psycho murderer, but a pathetic teenage killer. The inmates, outraged by such lies, beat up the murderer. One day, during work in the workshop, a tragic accident occurs. While the guards take away the injured, the others arm themselves and, stating that Choi won't leave the prison alive, attack him. But the future champion of MMA scatters the attackers. At night, he catches the schoolboy making a shank, and to punish him, he pretends to see dead people. And now, the victim of the schoolboy is standing behind him, saying that he will forever haunt his killer. The former, very gullible class leader experiences a mental breakdown. The day of release arrives. Choi meets the lawyer of the real culprit, who brings him additional money. But suddenly, the guy refuses them because he intends to live honestly from now on. Later, he goes to the pier and finds the 10 billion won hidden by his past self. He brings them to a rented apartment and makes plans for the future. At night, he dreams of his mother and wakes up in tears. And then, he receives a call from the mother of his new body. Choi promises to come. He divides the money into 2 parts, preparing one for the new mother and hides the other in a storage room at the station. Choi goes to the area where the fighter lived. He is attacked by a man with a knife, and Choi doesn't understand who wounded him. The man reminds him that he ran over his daughter with a car. The guy apologizes and confesses that another person committed the hit and run, and he took the blame for the money. The perplexed man stops when footsteps are heard and flees. It turns out that Choi's prison buddy caught up with him, but suddenly he confesses that he went to prison to kill the fighter and is now glad to have found him first because there is a reward for his head. The guy stabs Choi, who dies, regretting the money, and the phone rings, displaying the name of the mother. Choi finds himself before death again, but this time he cries, remembering his mother. Death is disappointed with his new failure, and he asks to be shot. In the next life, he finds himself in the body of a young guy, not far from the train station. Choi runs to the storage room and manages to retrieve the bag with the money at the very last moment. Then he sees a guy on a poster, and the appearing stone informs that the guy works as a model. Choi goes home and admires the expensive furniture. Then a call comes in, and a friend of the model reminds him of a party. Choi goes to the party and realizes that he can't handle alcohol because he gets drunk quick. Suddenly, the CEO of the corporation where he tried to get a job several times at appears, and Choi tries to get to know him, but then he completely indulges in the fun. He wakes up when his older brother wakes him up. It turns out they have a whole cafe to take care of, and when his brother leaves, Choi has to take responsibility for it, and on this day, he needs to work as a waiter. And then, at the cafe, enters his fiancée from his previous life, Ji-sil. The guy is completely speechless. He remembers how they met when the girl lost several pages of her first book, and he picked them up, and how he suggested they break up because he considered himself unworthy of her. And now, a new meeting. Choi's brother, noticing his awkwardness, informs him that the girl is a famous writer. Choi immediately Googles and learns that the girl's novel recently won a contest. It was dedicated to her favorite guy. Choi remembers the night before he jumped from the roof. Apparently, in that envelope was her prize money. Upset, the guy leaves to find the girl's book. As he reads it, he realizes that it was based on their shared experiences and events. He told her that no one would cherish her more than he did, and he promised never to let her go. Now, in the cafe, he remembers that he promised to give her a fountain pen after the publication of her book because, according to her, every true writer should have one. That evening, he secretly bought the pen and asked for it to be engraved, but he never gave it to her. Then, the man who he saw in front of her house that day approaches Ji-sil, but now he is with his family and calls the girl his sister. Choi realizes his mistake. The next day, he meets the girl with her favorite tea and asks for permission to tell her the idea of a new book. He tells the story of a person experiencing a series of deaths. The girl is amazed because he narrates everything so realistically. She asks for the hero's name, but instead, Choi asks for her autograph, and suddenly he sees the same pen in the girl's hands, which, it turns out, was given to her by Choi's mother. From that day on, he meets with her daily and told her what his supposed hero was going through. The girl was astonished because everything sounded so realistic, as if he were talking about a real person. One day, he gave the girl a red umbrella because it was raining outside. He returned to the cafe, where a waitress broke a glass, and he helped her clean up the shards and cut his hand. Then, police sirens sounded in the distance, and the girls who entered the cafe began talking about the accident victim. Choi rushed to the scene of the tragedy and saw the broken red umbrella. He started shouting when he saw Ji-soo standing across the street. The girl saw all of this and stayed to bandage his hand and talk. She understood that the guy was scared for someone dear. After all, she behaved the same way when she learned about her beloved's death. As a farewell, she says that she won't come anymore because his stories reminded her of her loss. Later, she goes to Choi's burial place and cries in front of his photograph, and Choi himself watches this from the sidelines. After waiting for the girl to leave, he approaches the shelf with urns, where Choi's mother finds him. He hears her crying and cries himself, trying to beg for forgiveness. Later, he writes a letter to Choi's mother, supposedly from Choi's friend, and puts it in the bag with the money, then gives it to the woman. The next day, he meets Ji-soo and tells her the continuation of his story. She finds it amazing, and she allows him to accompany her home. On the way, she hopes that his story will end well because she feels sorry for the main character. He remembers how once she introduced him to her colleagues, not caring that he was a waiter, as she considered him hardworking and handsome. She meant everything to him, but he never told her that. He thought she would cope with his death, and now he wants to apologize for not understanding her properly and admits that he will only ever love her. He blames himself for not realizing that there are people around who will cry and laugh with him in moments of disappointment and joy. He understands that nothing can be changed, but everything he told her happened to him. He got into this body by the will of the goddess of death, and he calls himself by his real name, Choi. But then, a car runs into them. With fading eyesight, he sees the director of the same corporation stepping out of the car, who is upset, with a broken bumper, and he remembers that in their lives, he had encountered this man more than once. It was he who was responsible for the airplane crash, eliminating his brother as a competitor in that way, and for running over the girl, and now he calmly kills Choi. Later, the police and doctors remove the consequences of the accident, and Choi comes to his senses on the brink of hell and promises to himself to destroy this scoundrel. And then he grabs a gun and shoots the goddess of death. An amazing idea, excellent special effects, and a very deep meaning. And not in vain, according to many film critics, this series has become a real breakthrough in Korean cinema. Friends, I highly recommend watching it. At the moment, only 4 episodes have been released, and I'm eagerly awaiting the continuation.